A few years ago, I set up nest boxes here on the wildlife homestead in hopes of attracting tree swallows. Since then, they've returned every spring, and this year I decided to document the entire nesting season, from the day they arrived to the day the chicks fledged. Between the good days and the hard ones, I developed a new appreciation for what these incredible birds go through to raise their young. Here's everything that happened inside the nest of a tree swallow. Tree swallows arrive early in the season to form pairs, mate, and aggressively defend their nest sites. But on our homestead, it's actually relatively peaceful, all things considered. I've set up 10 boxes for swallows, and we usually only get a couple of pairs. One pair will defend 2 boxes, so there's still plenty that are available, and this means they don't have to waste as much energy fending off other swallows. This year, the first tree swallows showed up in early May. They were flying high above our meadows and calling out, but eventually made their way down to the boxes. Males and females can sometimes be tricky to tell apart, but luckily the main pair I was watching looked a little different from one another. The female, which is the one on the right, has more green in her feathers than the deep blue of the male. They spent a few days choosing a nest site and they added a bit of grass at the bottom, but afterwards I barely saw them. For the next 3 weeks, there was so little activity at the boxes that bluebirds started considering them for a nest of their own. In our area, there's basically a risk of freezing overnight temperatures up until June. So this delay in nest building allows the swallows to wait for more favorable conditions and to time their egg-laying with the abundance of insects that were soon to come. It wasn't until the end of May that the swallows finally started building their nest. It's the female that does the bulk of the nest building. Despite swallows having weak legs, she manages to hop around on the ground and collect grasses. Every piece she brings in is laid around the eventual cup, which she forms with her body. Over the next week, she made hundreds of trips to fill the nest. This is what these trips look like in regular speed. They're so quick it almost looks like the footage is sped up. It's not until you slow things down that you can really appreciate all of the details. During this time, the pair were also on the lookout for feathers to help line and insulate the nest. Historically, tree swallows would nest in wetlands and beaver bogs where there were plenty of waterfowl feathers to use. But here we're further away from bigger wetlands, so it's more likely they get feathers that were left behind after a predator has made a kill. Before all the feathers were brought into the nest, the female started putting her energy into egg laying. One egg can weigh around 10% of her body weight, so she lays one a day early every morning to give herself the rest of the day to hunt and replenish her energy. Every year our swallows have laid exactly 6 eggs, and this year was no different. Incubation only began when all of them were laid. She alternates between sitting on the eggs for 20 to 30 minutes and going out to feed for 5 to 10 minutes. As aerial insectivores, tree swallows expertly maneuver through the air to catch their prey. Whether it's low to the ground or high in the sky, wherever the insects are flying, the swallows have no trouble tracking them down. Throughout the season, they'll catch a variety of different insects, from tiny flies that are barely visible to larger ones like moths and dragonflies. While she's out feeding, the male will usually watch over the eggs and guard the box. This is where nesting later in the season when it's warmer, and lining the box with all those feathers really pays off because the female can hunt for longer periods without worrying about the eggs cooling off too much. Incubating the eggs and hunting was her routine for the next 2 weeks. Until one day, she revealed 6 tiny pink nestlings underneath her. They're born with their eyes shut and nearly featherless, so they all huddle together to keep warm. During the first few days, the nestlings can barely lift their heads, but anytime they feel movement, hear a noise, or sense a change of light, their instinct is to beg for food. The yellow bordering in the mouth reflects light and gives the adults a feeding target. You'll see here the male brings in a moth, but only feeds a chick when he sees an open mouth. It looked like the second tree swallow pair, which was nesting further down in the meadow, also had their young hatch because the male started doing regular trips with mouthfuls of insects. Early on, it's the males doing most of the hunting since the females still need to stay back and provide heat to the young. For these chicks, getting enough food and staying warm are the 2 most important factors at this stage. So one of their biggest threats is bad weather. Heavy rains and heavy winds can ground many of the flying insects, making it difficult for the parents to catch enough food to feed them all. If the weather stays bad for long enough, it's common that the youngest, weakest chick doesn't make it. These nestlings were tested early because for 2 straight days we were hit with heavy downpours, and I watched the female sitting in the entrance anxiously waiting for breaks in the rain. But luckily, the rain let up enough, and despite fewer feedings and being a little wet, they were still able to catch enough insects to keep each chick alive. And that's when I witnessed something that would have been far more devastating than the rain. I just happened to be walking by the window when the male flew into the box, and right behind him a bird zipped in, hovered at the entrance hole, and then perched beside the nest. It was a sharp-shinned hawk. It's hard to see, but from the entrance hole you can just barely make out the gray silhouette of the hawk as it passed. I timed this attempted attack and it was about 1 second away from catching the male. Meanwhile, he just entered the box, casually fed the chicks. He didn't even know what just happened. It wasn't until other birds started alarm calling that he realized there was a predator around. The hawk perched here for 5 minutes. Eventually it realized it wasn't going to take any birds by surprise, and it left. From the day the swallows arrived up until this moment, they put in 51 days of work, and it was almost for nothing. This just shows that it doesn't only take skill to successfully raise the young, but it takes luck as well. If the sharp-shinned hawk was 1 second faster, or if the rainstorm had come 2 weeks later when the chicks were much bigger and much hungrier, it would have been disastrous for the swallows. But the next day, the sun was up, the insects were buzzing, and the adults started feeding the nestlings at a furious pace. Between the insects being fed to the young and the ones being eaten by the adults, one tree swallow pair can catch up to 10,000 a day. Of the thousands they catch, sometimes they get a few freebies when insects have the misfortune of entering their box. At around 6 days old, it looked like the chicks were getting a little too big for the female to continue brooding them. They've started making their first sounds, and they're just about ready to start growing in most of their feathers. In a few days, they'll be able to thermoregulate without the help of the female. This is a big step because it takes a lot of energy for her to transfer heat to the chicks, so she can now put all her energy into hunting and keeping them well fed. And with more energy going into feeding, more food means more waste, which is something the parents had to manage from day one. At first, the fecal sacs were small enough that the adults would just eat them, but that was no longer practical once the chicks got bigger. So now, when they were bringing food in, they were taking waste out. But they don't simply drop these fecal sacs on the ground because predators can still pick up the scent that leads back to the nest. Instead, they completely dispose of the fecal sac by flying high above our pond and dropping it in. That way there's no risk a predator will find it. I think this pond is one of the main reasons the tree swallows nest here. They not only use it to dispose of the fecal sacs, but they'll also hunt the insects around the pond, drink, and bathe here. One of my favorite behaviors is that, unlike other songbirds that land at the water's edge, tree swallows drink and bathe entirely on the wing. Bathing is one of the riskiest times for a bird. Standing in the water and splashing around, for a moment they're essentially blind and deaf. On top of that, the bird is now wet and weighed down, and it needs to perch nearby to preen before it can fly properly again, which makes them even more vulnerable to predators. Tree swallows, on the other hand, fly low and fast right above the surface of the water. In one quick motion, they gently dip below, give a quick shake, and they're right back to flying. It almost seems like everything they do is about being fast and efficient just so they can get back to feeding the chicks. And at this point, they've grown from quiet little pink hatchlings to loud feathered nestlings constantly begging for more food. "18 days after hatching, babies from both nests were climbing up to the entrance holes. This is a huge milestone for the nest. Now the adults no longer need to enter the box to feed the chicks. They can deliver the food right at the entrance. Over a 16-hour period, from sunup to sundown, these parents were delivering mouthfuls of insects every couple of minutes. For 3 straight days, the baby swallows took turns fighting for their spot at the entrance hole. Until one morning in mid-July, when the behavior of the parents started to change. Feedings went from every few minutes to every 10 minutes, and then every 15 minutes. This is a strategy to motivate the chicks to leave the nest. The adults were perching nearby and calling out, which didn't really work, but the nestlings were getting restless, so the next strategy was to try to coax them out with big mouthfuls of insects. The past 2 years I've been experimenting with building larger tree swallow boxes, and one benefit to this is the nestlings have plenty of room inside to stretch and develop their muscles before their first flight. So when these young were finally ready to leave, they all had successful takeoffs. Sometimes the last 1 or 2 chicks are a little weaker, so they'll spend an extra day in the box. But from the first one that fledged to the last one, it took a little under 2 hours. They took cover off in the distance in some taller trees where they waited for the parents to bring them food. Funny enough, about an hour later I heard some commotion outside and I thought the young had flown back around the box, but it turned out to be a group of recently fledged barn swallows. The past few years I've been trying to attract barn swallows to nest here, so it was kind of a strange coincidence that they showed up on the exact same day that the tree swallows fledged. For a brief moment, there were tree and barn swallows, as well as cliff swallows that are nesting under our roof, all flying above our meadows and ponds, which is what I dreamed of someday seeing when I set up these boxes and structures years ago. After fledging, they only stuck around for the day. The next morning, they were likely grouping up with other swallows to head south. And as they make their journey along the Atlantic coast to their wintering grounds, I'll be here with boxes ready, eagerly awaiting the spring to see them once again flying high above the wildlife homestead.